Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to this webinar on Professor Gila Stopler's fascinating new book, Women's Rights in Liberal States, Patriarchy, Liberalism, Religion, and the Chimera of Rights. I'm Cora Chan, Professor of Law and Director of the Center for Comparative and Public Law at the University of Hong Kong, and I'll be chairing this event. Today, we are extremely honored to have with us the author of the book, Professor Gila Stopler, full professor and former dean of law school at the College of Law and Business in Israel, to speak to us. We are also very honored to have my colleague, Professor Stefano Osella, assistant professor and deputy director of the Center for Comparative and Public Law, to comment on the book. Thank you very much to you both for making time for this event. I'll begin by congratulating Gila on the publication of this important and very timely book. This is a comprehensive treatise on the roots of discrimination against women in liberal theory and practice, their salience in the current age of populist authoritarianism, the danger they ultimately pose to liberal constitutionalism, and the theoretical and practical changes needed to liberate liberalism from its patriarchal roots. So a lot is at stake here. The book is a page turner. It's breathtaking, and I recommend all of you to read this book. What I find to be particularly impressive is its ability to trace and critique a wide range of loaded subjects: patriarchy, feminism, religion, populism, and what I often find to be very obscure, liberalism. So I find the book's exposition of liberalism to be very clear and illuminating. As such, the book is not just for those who are interested in women's rights, it's also for those who wish to understand any of the subjects that I've just outlined, and also for those who wish to make sense of the liberal backsliding in contemporary societies. The book contains many original theoretical insights that are spread throughout the book, including insights on how we can perceive the relationship between patriarchal religion and the liberal state. So I find the analysis to be very sophisticated and helpful. And the book is not, it's a book in the legal field. Well, Gila is in the law faculty, but the book is not constrained by legal methods. It is, I would think that it's an exemplar of the study of law in its historical, social, and cultural context. So many congratulations, Gila. And may we begin by inviting Professor Stopler to present the key ideas of the book. After that, we'll invite Professor Osella to give some comments, and then for Gila to respond. And at the end of that, we'll invite we'll look at questions from the floor. So if members of the audience, very welcome to this webinar. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A box anytime. You can do that anytime. You don't have to wait till the end of the webinar to leave questions or comments in the Q&A box. So thank you, Gila. I'll now pass the stage to you.
So I'm deeply grateful to you, Cora, for inviting me, and I'm also for chairing this event, and I'm also deeply grateful to Professor Osella for agreeing to comment on the book. And what I'll do in this talk, like in the first part, I'll briefly introduce the main themes of the book. In June 2022, the US Supreme Court issued the Dobbs decision. In the decision, it eliminated the constitutional right to abortion with a devastating impact on the lives of tens of millions of American women. The Dobbs majority based its decision on America's, and I quote, history and traditions, specifically on those existing at the time of the passage of the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution, which is 1868. Now, in applying 1868 standards to women's rights, the court wasn't deterred at all by the knowledge that in 1868, American women did not have the right to vote, and most married women had no legal personhood. due to the rules of coverture. As scholar Michelle Godwin aptly explains when she analyzes the court's decision, the court's legal doctrine is not a doctrine at all, and it is, and I quote, it consists of little more than a conservative political and religious judgment. End of quote. Now, the Dobbs decision is an excellent example of what I see as the toxic combination of patriarchy and religion, which I discuss in the book, and which affects women's rights in Western liberal states in the new millennium. So in the book, I argue the following. First, I argue that patriarchy and patriarchal religion have always existed in liberal states and have been partly accommodated by these states at the expense of women's rights. Second, the resurgence and the repoliticization of patriarchal religion in the 21st century have considerably magnified threats facing women's rights in Western liberal states. Third, and moreover, the repoliticization of religion in the new millennium is often part and parcel of the rise of nationalism and of right-wing populism. Together, these phenomena threaten not only the rights of women, but the future of liberal democracy itself. In many countries, the calls to restrict women's rights have become the most effective rallying cry for right-wing populists and religious conservatives in what I think is their surprisingly successful attack on the foundations of liberal democracy. Fourth, I argue the success of the populist attack on women's rights, together with decisions such as Dobbs, have confirmed feminist warnings regarding the flawed protections of women's rights in liberal societies, which have often been rejected as unfounded, as alarmist by most liberals. And fifth, and consequently, I claim that those of us who are interested in living in countries that have liberal democratic regimes must re-examine the foundations of liberalism to ensure that liberal theory and practice can protect both the rights of women and other minorities and the future of liberal democracies themselves. Now, the book examines the ways in which patriarchy is embedded in liberal theory, in law, in practice, as well as in the dominant mainstream religions in liberal society. I want to stress the book is not against religion. It's against what I again say, the combination between religion and patriarchy. There are many religions that are not patriarchal, and this book definitely doesn't go against them. I completely acknowledge the importance of religion in people's lives, but I think that this importance is misused by patriarchy and by those who use or misuse religion to advance patriarchal notion. And the book exposes how the enduring power of patriarchy in liberal societies is used by these right-wing populists to advance their own cause, to restrict the rights of women, and to endanger liberal democracy itself. My examination in the book is both conceptual and diachronic, and it centers on the ways in which patriarchy and patriarchal religion are reflected in the liberal legal order in Western liberal societies, with a special emphasis on the United States. So what is patriarchy, which I'm talking about? Now, according to contemporary feminist theory, patriarchy is a form of power. While the most common understanding of patriarchy today is as male dominance over women in society, patriarchy is much more than that. Feminist anthropologist Sherry Ortner explains, and I quote in my book, patriarchy is more than just sexism. It's a social formation of male gendered power with a particular structure that can be found with striking regularity in many different arenas of social life, from small-scale contexts like the family, kin groups, and gangs, up through larger institutional contexts like the police, the military, organized religion, the state, and more. End of quote. Now, even more important to my argument is that according to sociologist Max Weber, Patriarchal domination is the purest form of traditional authority. It forms the basis for what Weber terms the patrimonial state. This form of traditional state authority has all but disappeared in liberal democracies in modernity until recently. But in the last decades, I argue, there has been a political resurgence of patriarchy as a preferred social and political formation of power and authority through religious conservatism and through right-wing populism. And this resurgence and the drive to base state authority on patriarchal principles, I claim, poses a threat both to women's rights and to the future of liberal democracy itself. Now, the reason why the opposition to women's rights and to gender ideology has become an important engine of this right-wing populist revolution is that the basis for both is patriarchy. Now, I want to touch a bit on the public-private distinction because the linchpin of the argument in the book builds on the feminist critique of the public-private distinction. And this distinction is foundational to liberalism, and it's foundational to its relationship with patriarchy and religion. And I claim that to understand this link between patriarchy and traditional forms of religion and their threat to liberalism and to women's rights, we need to go back to the 17th century and the advent of liberalism. So what some might dismiss as, antiquated history, I actually think is in fact crucial to understanding the plight of liberal democracies today. In his classical patriarchal theory from the 17th century, which was liberalism's predecessor, Robert Filmer defended the patriarchal political rule of kings based on the argument that, and I quote, the first kings were fathers of families. Conversely, in his two treatises on government, John Locke rejected the political aspects of Filmer's theory, which were based on religious patriarchal rule of the father, and offered instead the social contract theory, on the basis of which is the basis of liberalism, declaring that all men are entitled to political liberty and equality. However, as feminist scholar Carol Pateman astutely notes in her analysis of the relationship between patriarchy and liberalism, while liberalism rejected the political aspects of Filmer's theory, it simultaneously embraced the patriarchal subjugation of women to men, seeing it as natural and as belonging to the private, non-political sphere. Locke justified men's right to keep women subordinated in the private sphere while keeping the public sphere of freedom and equality for themselves on the basis of the order of God and of the laws of nature. Consequently, the liberal state has been structured around a political sphere of freedom and equality for men and a private sphere of patriarchal subjugation of women, which was viewed as natural and non-political. And women's later entry into the public sphere has hardly changed this fundamental adherence of liberalism to the public-private distinction. Even many egalitarian liberals who insist that the foundational principle of liberalism is equality, such as Ronald Dworkin, restrict equality to the public sphere. So I quote from Ronald Dworkin, the liberal conception of equality is a principle of political organization that is required by justice, not a way of life for individuals. And liberals as such are indifferent to whether people choose to behave as liberals are supposed to prefer. Now, I argue in the book that this form of political liberalism has never been capable of adequately facing the challenges of patriarchy and patriarchal religion and has never really wanted to. Therefore, although the advent of liberalism with its public-private distinction supposedly signaled the confinement of religion and its discriminatory aspects to the private sphere, patriarchal religion's power to subordinate women, to affect their status in both the public and the private sphere has remained considerable. I describe in the book by giving many examples from various liberal countries, which unfortunately I don't have the ability to go into now. But the result was that despite its universal promise of equality and freedom and of the separation between religion and the state, liberalism has always held very different consequences for men and women. Now, a little about the scope of this public-private critique. I must emphasize that while this critique is central to the feminist critique of liberalism, most feminist critiques do not call for the complete erasure of the public-private distinction, obviously. Rather, what the critique contends is that in a society in which gender hierarchy and sex discrimination exist, the public-private distinction is often used to perpetuate and deepen them. As the known feminist slogan, "the personal is political," aptly states, relegating patriarchy and patriarchal religion to the private sphere has neither depoliticized religion or patriarchy, nor has it disempowered patriarchy and patriarchal religion. Quite to the contrary. Feminist legal theorist Frances Olson points out that power holders in liberal societies gain legitimacy and immunity from attack by being in the private sphere, and that way they gain a way to maintain the status quo to their own advantage by characterizing their power as private. So powerful patriarchal religious entities use their position in the private sphere both to protect their own interests and to immunize their discriminatory actions against women from any scrutiny and interference. And then simultaneously, they characterize the power that's deployed against them as public and claim that it is unconstitutional and unjustly oppressive towards them. So they use this public-private distinction both as a shield to protect themselves and as a sword to disempower women. In the book, I argue that this exploitation of the public-private distinction has facilitated the current rise of right-wing populism and of religious nationalism in what Arato and Cohen call the dark side of civil society. Now, I want to connect this to my critique of political liberalism in the context of the public-private distinction in the book. The book includes a detailed feminist critique of political liberalism, but here I can only summarize the two fundamental errors that I claim political liberalism has done and how they have enabled this rise of right-wing populism. So political liberalism's first error is that it has for long allowed non-liberal and illiberal comprehensive doctrines to flourish, to gain strength in liberal societies, and to use that strength in both the public and the private spheres to restrict the rights of women and other disempowered groups. Political liberalism's second error is what I see as its naive and indeed misguided assumption that citizens who adhere to non-liberal and illiberal comprehensive doctrines in their private lives will simultaneously develop a genuine commitment to a liberal political conception of justice. The magnitude of this second error has only been fully apparent with the surprising success of right-wing populism, which is based on the strength of these pre-existing and non-liberal and illiberal groups that rally behind right-wing populism. Now, when explaining why political liberalism is a viable theory, Rawls assumes that when citizens are faced with an incompatibility, and now I quote, I quote from Rawls, incompatibility between the political conception and their comprehensive doctrines, then they might very well adjust or revise the latter, which means their comprehensive doctrines, rather than reject the political conception. End of quote. Unfortunately, this expectation that illiberal doctrines would liberalize over time has been overly optimistic. There's no empirical evidence to back it. And quite to the contrary, the rise of right-wing populism, the repoliticization of religion, the ascent of religious nationalism have made it clear that many adherents of illiberal comprehensive doctrines refuse to accept their relegation to the private sphere. And I want to connect this to why does right-wing populism succeed? Okay, so populism is an ideologically thin doctrine. It relies on thick host ideologies. And as a result, right-wing populism has proven to be a highly efficient tool for proto-authoritarian leaders that enables them to unite different non-liberal and illiberal ideologies around two common denominators, which together have proven to be devastating for liberal constitutional democracy. So first, the classification of the liberal elite and its liberal causes, including the protection of women's rights, right? Also the protection of other sexual minorities, of racial minorities, of immigrants, etc., as a common enemy of the true quote unquote people. Now, second, what right-wing populism does is it calls to dismantle the liberal state's institutional framework, including the courts, the professional civil service, which is, according to this claim, the primary obstacle preventing the realization of this will of the true people. So all these political framework, which political liberalism has counted on, right-wing populism simply dismantles. Now, in the book, I discuss examples from urban in Hungary, from peace in Poland, mostly the example of the United States, where populist President Trump has aligned himself with powerful religious conservatives, with Christian nationalists, whose support he gained, among other things, through promises to enact public policies narrowing the rights of women and of other sexual minorities, hence Dobbs. Consequently, the struggle between liberal democratic and religious populist forces in places such as the United States today is not just around the power of patriarchy to control women in the private sphere. And this is very important to understand, that what stands at the heart of this struggle is the religious conservative and right-wing populist effort to erase the boundary between the public and the private, to dismantle the liberal state structure and to reinstate a traditional patriarchal political order as the basis for a patrimonial state. Now, obviously, such a patriarchal order is devastating to the rights of women, to the rights of sexual minorities, of racial minorities, of immigrants, of whoever is not the true man that can be, the supreme ruler in that patriarchal order. So to conclude, by exposing the deep embeddedness of patriarchy in liberalism, in populism, in conservatism, as well as in religion and culture, what I try to do in the book is to deepen our understanding of the weakness of women's rights in Western liberal democracies, to expose the underlying connections between this weakness and the success of religious nationalism and right-wing populism, and to point to the conceptual, structural, and legal changes that are needed to restrict the power of patriarchy, to promote the rights of women, and to help curb the rise of religious nationalism and right-wing populism. So I'll stop here and
same old problem. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Gila, for this clear and compelling presentation. I'll now pass the stage to Professor Ursula to present comments. Thank you, Stefano.
Thank you, Professor Chan. Thank you. I'm sorry, but there are people. Not a moment. Sorry. Yes, leave it there. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry about that. Well, thank you very much for this great book. It has been a pleasure to read it. It is extremely enjoyable, as Professor Chan has said. It is extremely learned, it is sophisticated, and it focuses on a topic which is urgent, that deserves thorough exploration now. And so I can only thank the author for putting together such a brilliant piece of scholarship. So thank you very much for that. Now, there are many reasons to read this book. Mostly, they were already expressed by Professor Stopler just now. It's really a profound analysis, not just of the law, of what's going on now, but of liberal theory. And specifically on how patriarchy indeed fails women in liberal theory, but ultimately also how patriarchy fails liberal theory itself. In a way, it's a j'accuse against the incapacity of liberal theory and liberal democratic regimes of protecting women, and by failing to do so, to protect themselves. That's really at the core of the argument. Now, I myself am very much interested in the topic, and I have a few questions for Professor Stopler. Before I start with my questions, I would like to say that once more, I believe that the focus of the book, specifically on the rights of women, is badly needed. As we all know, unfortunately, discrimination against women is still a heinous daily reality, and in fact, if anything, is on the rise. So it's great that the focus is on that. So just to clear the field from any misunderstanding, because now I think I will finish the laudatio and move on to the more critical part of my comment. To be one last caveat, it is critical, but it is very much well meant. I think we come from the same, normative standpoint, and for this reason, I really am eager to engage in dialogue and constructive deliberation, so to say. So political liberalism. So the main question, if not concern, actually, that I have with this book is with the use of patriarchy. Not because I have any problem with patriarchy per se, but because I wonder whether patriarchy is a concept which is flexible enough to create the conditions for building alliances among the many subjects that have been targeted by right-wing populism in Europe, in Israel, and in the US, among other places. I also think of Latin America, for example. Now, Professor Stopler adopts the understanding of patriarchy that was mostly conceptualized by Gerda Lerner, and as she said just before I started talking, it's the oppression of women by men. Now, as Professor Stopler said in the book, over and over, and she also said now, it's not just that. This kind of oppression intersects with many more forms of oppression. It intersects with racism. It intersects with heterosexism, just to name two. Probably it also intersects with ableism and other more. Nevertheless, the understanding of the subjects that comes across in the book is mostly binary. It's, with some degree of simplification from my part, and I apologize for that, it's a category of people, women, being oppressed by another category of people, men. These two categories, give and take, are understood, not understood, but mostly proposed as uniform categories in the book, at least based on my understanding. To be clear, again, Professor Stopler doesn't make such a simplistic argument. Her argument is much more complex. For example, she acknowledges the importance of intersectionality repeatedly throughout the book. For example, when she discusses the Dobbs decision towards the end of the book, she makes a very detailed argument on how and why the Dobbs decision impact on Black women in the US. So I'm not saying nor suggesting that Professor Stopler doesn't see the intragroup differences, but the definition adopted is very much based on not standard, but largely uniform understandings of men and women. Now, this is somewhat, I believe, complicated because right-wing populism in Europe and in the US has targeted women predominantly, that's true, but it has also targeted other groups very much explicitly. So, for example, when the new president of the United States was inaugurated, the very first day of this new term, he signed an executive order stating that there are two biological sexes and they are unchangeable. I'm not sure whether this was the first executive order, but I believe it was signed the first day, if not the first day, really at the beginning of the new tenure. In Europe, the specter, the phantasm, to cite Judith Butler, of gender theory is regularly used by right-wing populists to clamp down on the rights of LGBTQI people and of women as well. More examples are available. Crucial in this backlash against the rights of women and the rights of LGBTQI people is this notion of gender ideology, quote unquote, which is, again, as Butler said, a phantasm because its boundaries are very much hazy, but which is regularly invoked and used by traditionalists to argue for a more traditionalist, indeed, gender order in the law. This feared, phantasmatic gender theory targets women, of course, but it targets gender and sexual minorities as well. And for these people, it performs the same political function that it performs when it comes to cracking down on the rights of women. Now, Judith Butler suggests in their latest book, Who is Afraid of Gender, that the way forward is building strong alliances among individuals that have been targeted by right-wing populists in Europe and North America. These groups are women, of course, but also LGBTQI people, and I add also straight men who do not correspond to the norm. If we look carefully at what gender theory is, it's not just a theory that promotes the domination of men over women, but it's a theory that promotes the protection of one specific form of man, masculinist, heterosexual, and so on, probably white, most certainly white, probably, and versus others. So the question that I have is, if we understand the root of the problem as a dialectic between men and women, how can we make sure that this theoretical framework lends itself to cooperation, larger cooperations? This is not to cancel women. I want to say it once more. Women are heavily targeted by right-wing populists, but situations are more complex. And I can bring a few examples to complicate the scenario. Example number one, the rights of fathers. Now, I tread carefully here because oftentimes fathers' movements have been traditionalists and anti-feminists, but at other times, the rights of fathers, for example, the rights of fathers to be involved in caregiving, have been really informed by a feminist approach. If we look at the case law of the Colombian Constitutional Court, for example, and Ruth Rubio Marin is very clear about that, we understand that the very notion of masculinity that is enshrined in this patriarchal, if we will, backlash can be challenged by the idea of a caring father. And the caring father can be encouraged also by means of rights, for example, by granting them a paternity leave. Now, if we are understanding patriarchy in an oppositional dynamic between men and women, how can we make sure that this right is granted? Now, another issue, trans women. So just a few days ago, I read a very recent paper by Professor Sally Hines. She is a professor of sociologist, I believe, in Leicester University, but take Leicester with a pinch of salt. She is a very well-known sociologist in the UK. Perhaps Leeds. I apologize for the institution. I cannot really remember. But anyways, Professor Sally Hines wrote this very interesting paper discussing the relationship between gender-critical feminists opposing, to some extent, the recognition of trans rights and the right-wing movements. So how can we make sure that the rights of trans women are also protected, especially because we saw from certain strands of feminism an appropriation of radical feminism in an anti-trans way. I want to underline here that I believe that patriarchy can, in fact, be very effective also to protect the rights of trans women. Professor Catherine McKinnon very recently wrote a very strong argument in favor of trans women based on radical feminism. This is just one point, but I think this should be addressed. These are just the two main examples that come to mind. And before I conclude, I would also like to say that liberalism, to some extent, also fails queer people. When we talk about the public-private divide, which, as Carol Pateman said repeatedly, is at the core of the social contract. This idea that women should belong in the domestic sphere and men in the public sphere of paid employment and politics. How was this theory legitimated in the 17th and 18th century? Well, it was partly legitimated on the idea of the contract itself, Carol Pateman says, meaning women were, so to speak, very, very much fictionalized liberty to enter into marriage. And by entering into marriage, which was obviously a fictionalized liberty, I say it again, they agreed to the private sphere, okay? So there was the fiction of marriage that legitimated this subordination. But second, and this is again very clear from the writing of Locke and others, it was also the representation of a natural reality. So the public-private divide wasn't simply legitimated because women supposedly agreed to be in the domestic sphere when they married, but also because the public and private reflected, so to speak, the nature of men and women. What's the implication of this? The implication is that everyone should be either a man or a woman. Everyone should be, so to speak, with natural inclinations to be in the public sphere or in the private sphere, or in other words, everyone's gender should be understandable within this binary framework. And if this fails women, and it does, it also fails queer people, those who cannot fall neatly in either categories or who challenge those categories in one way or another. So I believe that to wrap it up, I believe that Professor Stopler's book provides a very strong basis for understanding the shortcomings that women and gender and sexual minorities are facing now in Europe and North America. But I also believe that it might be worth discussing how this theory can provide protection to other categories of people too. I believe it can, for what it's worth. I mean, I believe it can. But I also believe that we shouldn't be wasting an opportunity if we didn't say it explicitly. Anyways, it's a beautiful book. Please do read it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stefano. Really thought-provoking comments. In fact, listening to Gila and then you makes me want to ask two questions that are like a mirror image to each other, to you both. But I'll leave that to the discussion session. I'll first invite Gila to respond to comments. Thank you, Gila.
So I really want to thank Professor Osella for his generous engagement with my book. And I want to say that it's kind of funny because I agree with most of what he says, but I think that, and I obviously agree with all of his worries, but I don't think that but I think that they are answered in the book, and I'll just try to, again, to explain why. Professor Osella takes issue with my book's allegedly narrow definition of patriarchy, as the manifestation of male dominance over women in society, supposedly a homogeneous understanding of men and women. But I believe that both these worries are mistaken. First, as I already explained in the first part of the presentation, the male dominance over women is only one of the aspects of my understanding of patriarchy, because it's only one aspect of patriarchy as a political order. And I think that what we are facing is patriarchy as a political order. It is true that I have focused in the book on what it does to women, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't do things to other minorities. And I also explained that, although I agree not in detail in the book, but the idea that, the liberal idea that you can confine patriarchy to the private sphere, and consequently nobody would be harmed, and everybody's rights would be preserved just by allegedly maintaining equality in the public sphere. I show in the book that this assumption was wrong, and I completely agree that there are many. It's wrong both because the private sphere matters and because the private sphere radiates into the public sphere. So there is no way of maintaining equality, full equality in the public sphere without actually going into the private sphere. And I think that again, the current struggle is not just over women, not just over the private sphere. It's a much wider problem of dismantling the whole liberal democratic state in order to establish a patrimonial state that is based on a political rule of the father. And obviously, such type of patriarchal rule would not be only over women, it would be over all members of society. And it's not only in the private sphere, but also over the public sphere. And it has far-reaching consequences to all the groups that Professor Osella refers to in his comment. And I actually discussed that in the book. I'll say that in a minute. But it has far-reaching consequences to liberal democracy itself. So I don't think that I see that I conceptualize gender dynamics in homogeneous and binary terms. I think that we must, on the one hand, we must discuss the terms. If you are standing against, you're arguing against theory, you have to use its terms to make the argument. But that doesn't mean that I'm making an argument that supports this binary. So as you say, I talk about I don't see women as a homogeneous category. I talk at length about the disparate impact of jobs on Black women. I also, frankly, talk at length in chapter 4 about the impact of religion-state relation on minority religious women, and about the fact that I also proposed there, I don't have time to go into it, but I propose a framework of analyzing, you know, the distinct harms that happen to minority women from minority religions because of the patriarchal nature of minority religions, and how liberal states can actually use that framework to distinguish between what they can give minority religions without harming women within those minorities, and what they cannot give them. And I used two examples, one from a Muslim minority and one from Muslim minority in the United States and in Britain and in Canada, and the Jewish minority in New York. So, but I also talk about my concerns for LGBTQI plus people and how they would be affected, and I say, you know, that the remedies have to, liberals, for example, I quote, liberal states must prevent the misappropriation of rights such as equality and religious liberty by right-wing populists and religious conservatives who use them to restrict the rights of women and other disempowered minorities, such as LGBTQI plus, racial minorities, and immigrants. But most importantly, I think that the theoretical and legal strategy that I propose in the book is a holistic strategy. And with proper application, it can respond to all of Professor Rosella's concern. This strategy is in the tradition of what is known as the radical internal critique of liberalism, or humanist feminism. You can hear by the humanist that it's not just feminism, it's concerned about women, which was offered by the late Susan Okin. And this form of feminism seeks to provide theoretical underpinnings for a liberalism that will focus heavily both on the private and public life. It aims to identify all gendered power differentials, so not just between men and women, but all gendered power differentials, all the oppression and prejudices that are maintained and supported by what feminists call patriarchal liberalism in both spheres, and to suggest proactive measures to change them. And this strategy, which I discuss and defend at length in the conclusion to the book, is, as I said, very different from both neutrality-based political liberalism and equality-based political liberalism. It's a substantive egalitarian liberalism, which is not at all restricted just to women's rights, and calls for proactive states, proactive measures to remove all types of gendered power differentials. And among other things, obviously, this includes defending the rights of all sexual minorities, including trans and non-binary people, ensuring both men and women have the right to participate equally in the care of their children by removing, by going against the patriarchal binary. You should ensure equality of care, in the private sphere and in the public sphere, and ample assistance and equal assistance for all, both men and women, to do so. And just to conclude, clearly, patriarchal rule is foremost and always political. So we're talking about a political movement. Patriarchy is not ordained by God. It's not natural law. It's politics. And it's a politics that is based on a dichotomous understanding of men and women and of male and female. And at the same time, on a dichotomous understanding of who are the men who are eligible to be fathers in the patrimonial sense, which are only those from the right race, religion, and physical ability, and who are all those others who are only fit to be their political subjects. Fighting against the politically subordinating dichotomies or politically subordinating aspects of these dichotomies is at the heart of the struggle against patriarchy and against the patrimonial rule, and therefore it applies across the board. It does not apply just to categories of men and women, but the categories of men and women it's an imperative to use them in order to understand the politics of patriarchy and what we are up against. So I'll finish it.
Thank you very much, Gila, and thank you very much, Stefano. We now have about 10 minutes for discussion and question. We do have one question in the Q&A, and I encourage others to pose questions in the Q&A if you do have them. But perhaps before I pose the question in the Q&A, I'd like to pose a question for Gila and also a question for Stefano. To Gila, you have convinced me that liberal theory has patriarchal tenets that perpetuate gender equality. So I'm totally sold on that. And in your final chapter, you offer some suggestions on how liberal theory could and should be revamped to strengthen the protection of women's rights and ultimately its ability to counter patriarchy, including that in right-wing populism. My question is twofold. So first, could one argue that the patriarchal tenets of liberalism, for example, liberalism's current prevalent understanding of the public-private divide, could one argue that these patriarchal tenets are so core to liberalism that abandoning them amounts to abandoning of liberalism? In other words, in what way is your revamped theory and practice involving, for example, more state regulation of religion? In what way is your revamped theory and practice still liberal? So that's the first side of the question. And relatedly, the second side of the question is, do you think there are alternative theories to liberalism that might better enable us to build an equal and inclusive society? The rise of populist authoritarianism worldwide has prompted reflection on the shortcomings of liberal democracy, and there are many shortcomings of liberal democracy. It has also prompted thinking of alternative ideologies. So some people have even been saying, well, maybe there is something in authoritarian ideologies that we should look to, authoritarian visions of law and governance offered by China, Singapore, and so on. So I guess my question is, do we need to be freed from the liberal frame? Why stick with liberalism? So that's my question for Gila. My question for Stefano, really, really interesting and thought-provoking comments. I guess this is more of a request for clarification. So basically, are you trying to say that, so is your argument that patriarchy, the use of patriarchy itself is an unwise strategy because reliance on patriarchy entails reliance on theory that hinges on gendered categories? And is your argument that in itself, so reliance on a patriarchal frame, a frame that relies on categories of gender itself, is an unwise strategy? Or are you saying that there are ways in which we could salvage the framing of patriarchy such that it could still be useful for the movement on equality. So I wasn't sure whether you're saying that there's something, you know, inherent in the patriarchal frame that would make it an unwise and dangerous strategy to use for the equality movement? Or are you saying simply that the way patriarchy framework has been used makes it a dangerous frame because most people define gender in categorical terms, and that's why, you know, with all this baggage, it's best for us to not rely on the patriarchy. So which is it that you're saying? You're saying that there is something inherent about the patriarchal frame, reliance on gendered categories, that makes it an unwise strategy for the equality movement? Or are you saying that the current way of using patriarchy is an unwise strategy, and that we should rethink, you know, redefine patriarchy, think about ways of redefining it such that it could become a wise strategy? So which of it are you saying? So I'll maybe Gila could go first, and then Stefano.
Okay, thank you, Cora. Should I answer the questions in the what should I answer first? That's my
maybe. So yeah, I think you could answer the question that I posed to you first, and then I'll come back to the two questions in the Q&A box.
Okay, so regarding liberalism, look, liberalism is a very, very varied and, you know, and elastic concept. Now, there is, in my view, you know, feminists have always struggled with this question. So should we just, you know, throw, and for example, McKinnon is, you know, as a radical feminist, and in my youth, I was, I thought that, you know, being I identify with many of radical feminist tenets. And in my youth, I thought, you know, yeah, we should be radical feminists, and that's the way to actually, you know, make good change in the world and understand something important about the world. But as we know, you know, we're trying to say that, you know, the academia is not political. So how can we say that liberalism is a political concept? But it is a political concept, and I think it's owning liberalism. And you know, Trump is trying to own liberalism also. So Trump supporters are also saying that they're the true liberals. They're, you know, they are the classical liberals. So that's what they're doing, is that they're returning to actual liberal, you know, an actual liberal framework. So I'm not giving up on liberalism. I don't want to give up on liberalism. I think that liberal democracies should understand liberalism the way I suggest that they should understand it. I think it's right, and I think it's important. And I'm not going to, you know, I don't think that. I think liberalism is an extremely wide notion, and I don't think that the way that the public and private notion is understood today is the right liberal way to understand it. I just don't. And in this way, that's why I see myself as, you know, continuing Okin's work, and not, for example, McKinnon's work, which I also admire, but I think it's, you know, it's different. Because I think what Okin was trying to do very smartly was to say, listen, you're talking about in liberalism about equality, and everybody, the way we're, you know, we're juggling equality and freedom together, and everybody is happy, but you're not. And not everybody is happy, and women are not happy, and other sexual minorities are not happy, and racial minorities are not happy. And the question is why? Now, patriarchs are happy. We're happy by, you know, by liberalism. They were so happy that they have managed to take over liberal democracies. So I definitely, you know, hold on to liberalism, and I think it should be revamped, and I think it should do so in, you know, in the way that I suggest. should I turn to the other questions or?
Maybe I'll now first turn to Stefano, and then in the meantime, you could take a look at the 3 questions, and then we'll come back to you. Yeah, Stefano.
Thank you very much, Cora. And again, I want to make clear my point of view once more. By the way, these brief comments that I made are going to be part of a symposium on Professor Stopler's book, and as I wrote there, and I repeat here, I do not believe, I do not believe that the theoretical framework adopted by Professor Stopler is in any way antithetical to the questions that I raised. Quite the contrary, I believe it offers a very good standpoint to further theorize in relation to the rights of LGBTQI people, and also people who, generally speaking, do not fit into the category of right-wing populists in Europe and the US very much like. So there is no questions about that. Coming to that, I also believe that the framework of patriarchy is still very good. There is patriarchy. There is no question that patriarchy is an ongoing dynamic. There is, that's absolutely, we should clear the field from any misunderstanding. My point is rather different. My point is, considering that the use of patriarchy has been at times mobilized in an explicitly anti-queer and anti-LGBTQI+, and also anti-intersectional understanding, nothing of that has been done by Professor Stopler. Let's be very clear that I wrote that in the review, and I say it now once again. But I think this implication should be flagged out. I mean, we should say it. And I understand, that there is only so much that any book can do, and you focus on something and you cannot focus on everything. So I'm not trying to make an unfair critique here, but I also believe that this debate is helpful, to stress out that this theory has a lot of potential that goes beyond women. It's not just about women. It is primarily about women. That's fine, totally fine, but it is also possibly about other people, most likely about other people, and this must be, I believe, spelled out. Not necessarily in the book. The book, is a book. It's not an encyclopedia. It's not, the entire Bible from the beginning to the end. So there is only so much you can do. But on the other hand, I also believe that we can seize the opportunity to say, look, these theories run the risk of being appropriated, and we have to be genuine about that. They run the risk of being appropriated. I mean, let's go back to the example that I gave before. The executive order. It's entitled "Protecting Women" something. I cannot remember the title precisely, but the protection of women is somehow there. So I think we should be, and the protection of women is presented as antithetical to the rights of others. And the entire gender critical movement has projected the rights of gender minorities as antithetical to the rights of women, something that, again, Professor Stopler doesn't claim, and most people do not claim actually in the field, but some people do. And so for this reason, I believe we shouldn't be too sanguine, and we should seize the opportunity to say, look, patriarchy and the understanding of patriarchy can provide a strong base, the starting point for protecting the rights of women, and by doing so, protecting liberalism, but also for protecting someone else. And that's really what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stefano. So I'm going to read out the 3 questions, and then I'll pass the stage to Gila to respond to them all in one go. So the first question is, do you think the gendered roles of femininity led to stigma of female sex workers, and what solutions would you propose? I think Professor Stopler won't be able to give a very comprehensive answer to what solutions would you propose, but you should read the book. I'm intrigued by the second question. I'm intrigued by the metaphor of Chimera of rights in the book title. Could you please explain a bit what led you to choose this image and what it conveys about the nature of women's rights in liberal states? Do you mean that the women's rights in liberal states are illusory? And finally, in terms of religion and liberty, do you think the predominantly male gender of gods affects women's freedom and their position in society? Again, I think Professor Stopler talked about this. So Gila, I'll hand over to you for the final 3 minutes.
Yes,
addressing
thank you.
questions.
They're all great questions. And regarding the first question about female sex workers, so I really can't go too deep into that, but personally, I don't think the gendered role of femininity are the most acute problem with female sex workers. So I think that the power differentials are the most acute problem. I don't think that it's enough just to look at, at the gendered roles. I think, feminism says that everything is about power. So whenever you want to analyze any phenomenon, the first thing you need to analyze is who holds the power and how is it being used or misused. So I think that's a much that's a radical feminist, by the way, analysis. But I think that's the correct analysis. I don't think that by by removing the stigma from female sex workers, you actually resolve the problem. I think the problem is much much deeper than that. Regarding the chimera of rights, yes, so I do think that women's rights in liberal states are illusory, not in the sense that women don't have rights in liberal states, but in the sense that they are extremely fragile, in the sense that they can, just as is happening today, because of the hold that patriarchy has in liberal theory and the way that it uses this hold to restrict women. So it has used it even prior to to our current time, in which right-wing populism, religious conservatism, religious nationalism have arisen, and in some liberal democracies have already taken power. In others, they might take power every minute. So they're illusory in the sense that they are very much lauded, but they are actually much weaker and much more at jeopardy than liberals tend to see or to confess. And the question about the predominantly male gender of gods, so I really urge you to read my the first chapter of my book, which discusses basically this. I mean, among other things, it discusses, because it's a historical discussion of how actually patriarchy has evolved, and it discusses the work of Gerda Lerner, which is a very well-known historian of ancient times and of patriarchy. Her books are fascinating, and you can see references to them in the first chapter of my book. I mean, if you want the argument condensed, then you can see it in the first chapter. If not, then you can go and read Gerda Lerner's books on patriarchy and on the birth of feminism. I think these are crucial feminist stepping stones.
Thank you so much, Gila, and thank you, Stefano. I would just like to conclude that even though the book focuses on Western liberal states, I think many of the book's ideas, including the intricate relationship between law and religion, between the state and religion, and between law and culture, many of these ideas resonate also in non-Western states that are deemed liberal. So I have in mind India. They resonate also in illiberal enclaves in liberal states, and I have in mind colonial governance in the British Empire, and also obviously, I'm thinking about Hong Kong and hybrid regimes. We would be able to identify with those ideas. So thank you very much for writing this timely and important book. Thank you, Stefano, also for your very thought-provoking and illuminating comments. And thank you, all of you, for participating. I have, so in case you're interested in buying the book, there's a discount code that I've put in the chat box. Thank you all for joining, and I look forward to seeing you in future events by the center. So please join me in thanking Gila and Stefano again. Thank you, and congratulations, Gila, on this book.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was fascinating, and I really, really appreciate you inviting me in. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you for joining this event, and thank you all for your time.